Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to the Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Kia ora koutou katoa, and welcome in to this week's Hoon. And for those people who are just joining us, the Hoon, which is our name, is the collective noun for the kaka, the bird from New Zealand. And we just thought we'd mention that. So that's when people say you're going to go and watch the Hoon, and people go, what is that?
Yes.
It's not boy races, jumping around in a car.
Although we could do that, because we have done the kaka in the kaka before in the car. But it was just I was sending a message this week to a Bangladeshi academic who lives in Australia, and she said, "What is your podcast called?" And I said, "It's called the Hoon." And I thought, oh God, I wish she wasn't Australian, because she'd just see right through it. But then, of course, Helen Clark really likes hooning with us.
Yes, indeed.
So that's all right.
And we don't call our guests bogans or anything.
Jesus, that's what I haven't heard that for a while. Or Westies.
Westies or bogan? No. This is the Hoon, where we have a collection of people
of civilized, intelligent people
on the kaka, talking about the things that we care about. This week we've got some great guests on, starting of course with our regulars, Catherine Dyer on the climate, our climate correspondent, and our geopolitics correspondent, Robert Patman.
I think we could call him our senior geopolitics correspondent, don't you?
Love it.
I mean, I'm so fond of him. We need to do what I did a few months ago, and give him another one of those little bonus tips, because he is so kind to us, and I think he brings real gravitas to the show, which of course you and I don't, because we're too young.
Yes, but also he's right in the middle of this huge debate about AUKUS 2.
Yeah,
and we'll talk about that.
And you're thinking that we have an announcement today about it, which we'll go into, and you think it's bigger than I do, but we'll have a look. And we have Dr. Sanjana Hatutua coming on from Sri Lanka, in fact, who is the New Zealand expert on disinformation. And what I wanted to do, Bernard, we'll get there, is merge him a little bit with Robert, because there's so many aspects of these big international stories that get whirled around into disinformation, misinformation. And Dr. Hatutua is, a real expert on that, and as from a New Zealand point of view. And we see big stories happening in the UK right now where misinformation, disinformation is playing a really big role in this. And I think there are some big things coming in New Zealand. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to have him along, because I'm a little bit concerned, or very concerned actually, that there are, as we saw with COVID and lockdowns, some really interesting kind of disinformation, misinformation things, particularly now about Maori issues, at a time when there is quite a schism building up that I personally feel both invested in now that I've come back, and I feel risks in.
Yeah, it doesn't help that we see Hobson's Pledge people putting front page ads across the New Zealand Herald. I mean, this is
I thought that was quite impressive, actually. I must admit, I haven't seen the thing because I don't get the tangible paper, and I was looking for one. But I'm Dr. Michael Bassett is my JP and lives around the corner, and I've been tempted to get him on because I'm perplexed at his support for the Hobson Pledge, because actually I'm not entirely, because he's of a generation which sees Maori in a different light than I see it, perhaps, or certainly than my daughter or your daughters probably see it. I think maybe we should get one of the Hobson Pledge people on. I'll drop him a note. Shall we?
Yeah.
Or do they fit into your "I'm not having any bloody nasty bastards on"? Is that what we're?
Well, we could talk monetary policy with Don Brash.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's something to think about. I mean, this whole issue of how we debate our topics of the age is now very live, and something I'm increasingly worried about.
Or that we don't debate it, that we actually
accept each other.
No, but these things also, let's accept certain things are settled. It's a little bit like Roe versus Wade. But as a KC I was talking to today, of course I just hang out in those rarefied circles, said, think about where David Seymour comes from in connection to things like the American Project 2025. And I think there is some validity in that. So I think we have to, look, I've been building up to this, but I think we need to talk about asking David. Of David Seymour, you've gone still.
That's right. My heart stopped.
Yeah.
No, but
we'd need to be very well briefed because he's very clever and he's very good. But I'll see if Michael Bassett would think about coming on, because it's we can't just throw grenades at these people. We're not Sean Plunkett.
Yes. No, something to look forward to. And then we'll be speaking with Kate Day, who is...
Yeah. What you will be? Well, I'm here too. Thank you very much. I'm your co-host.
No, I said we'll be speaking
to...
I
think you said I would be. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'll be speaking to Kate Day, who is the co-director at Common Grace Aotearoa. And they've done some really interesting campaigning on disconnection charges for people who can't afford to pay for their power. The reason this is topical this week is that Contact Energy has announced that they're getting rid of these disconnection fees. Now, these range from $200 to $400 per disconnection. Some of them are for remote disconnections, with these power meters. So someone moves a mouse and clicks a button, and then suddenly you're charged $200 for that. And sometimes, though, there are someone has to turn up to a house and fiddle with a button. And these are incredibly difficult fees for people to pay. Once they're behind on their bill, they've been disconnected.
Exactly. It's exactly like the poor old English people. I don't. We don't have metered power here, do we? Where people have to put credit card, go to the local co-op shop and put. Do we?
Yep.
They have to go and put money go to the shop and put money in there.
Prepay. That
really?
Is the thing. And
on power meters?
Absolutely.
Bloody hell.
Yep. And again, there's an interesting debate about whether that's a good idea and what the prices are. They tend to be higher, of course. It is very expensive to be poor. And,
yes.
And that is something we'll talk about with Kate, and very topical this week because of the extraordinary things happening in the electricity system.
Is she representing Winston's?
No.
Not Winston Peters. Is she representing Winston?
Oh,
Mills?
Winston's the pulp and paper mill. No, she's not. But 375 people lost their jobs in the last 2 days because big factories have shut down because the power price has gone up by 10 times. The wholesale power price up by 10 times in the last.
Who could possibly have imagined that if you privatise the gentailers that things might go a little awry?
Exactly. And then you tell them, because you still own 51% of 3 of the 4, that you want high dividends, not investment in renewable energy. And then suddenly when we have one dry winter and a bit of gas doesn't turn up, all hell breaks loose.
So is Kate able to comment on those aspects too?
Yeah, no, she's familiar with the problems in the electricity market and how it hasn't performed for regular consumers. It's been fantastic for shareholders. And is effectively a form of de facto tax.
So before we flick to Catherine, let me just explain a little bit, and Simon will edit this. But we've got quite a wide. We had expected a few more guests in a sense, but we've got quite a wide-ranging show today. So it's really going to be sort of touch points on news, particularly in the international affairs. We're going to skip from climate with Catherine in a moment. We're going to deal with AUKUS, a big development in AUKUS, Ukraine, in the international affairs area, Bangladesh, a little bit on the UK riots, and of course Bernard will end with the New Zealand economy and power with Kate.
Yeah, no, it's we all around the world and up and down the world's great topics in 59 minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah,
good on you. Yeah. Nice work.
So. Yes. So, Catherine, thank you very much for coming on. Catherine Dyer, our climate correspondent. We've just recorded this week's version of the Climate Wrap, so a lot more detail in there. But I think it's worth, talking about these extraordinary things happening in the electricity market. In this morning's Hoon, I talked about the sharp increase in prices, the factories shutting down, and Simeon Brown, our energy minister, going straight into Parliament to say the solution to this problem is to import some gas. Tell us about the situation we're in and whether there are other options.
Kia ora, Bernard. Yeah, I mean, I think the actual transition going from where we are in terms of renewable energy to what we're going to need in the future, it is just a lot more complicated than has been given, than people have assumed. And we've had a lot of governments that have kind of come along and thought that the market was going to be able to handle this.
Of course it is.
And clearly, and the market is a pretty constructed thing anyway. I mean, it's constructed by the government with all of its rules and everything in the first place. And it's just not going to be able to do this. They need a lot more signals from government, particularly about what policy around other climate policies are going to look like. So, how faster electric cars going to arrive, and so that they need a lot more signalling about what the future is going to look like before those power companies have got the confidence to start building out the intermittent energy. And then there needs to be some plan as to how you're going to manage that. That introduction of more intermittent energy to the grid. There's all these complexities around it that haven't really been, they haven't been planned out. I think, or there hasn't been enough signalling from the government as to how those things are going to progress for that to really happen. And so, you find, and that's consecutive governments. That's not one side of politics or the other. It's been going on for a long time. So,
essentially, we're at that moment where the rubber has to hit the road, where we have to actually reduce emissions, and that has to involve some change. I actually think, luckily for us, it's happening at a time when suddenly there's been a collapse in the cost, at least the financial cost.
Yes.
You could argue there could be some wider climate costs and externalities, as they say in the trade, which we're not paying for. But essentially, the Chinese government has invested huge chunks of GDP in subsidizing the creation of monster factories for panels, batteries, and electric vehicles. It looks like the rest of the world, Europe and the United States, are going to poo-poo the imports of this stuff because they want to try and build their own industries. We have an opportunity to quickly electrify our economy with cheap panels, batteries, and cars. Instead, the energy and transport minister has gone straight to, well, let's import some liquefied natural gas. Catherine,
do we even have the capacity to absorb LNG in these?
No.
Do we have an LNG terminal?
No, and they're not easy and fast.
No,
and
they're
cheap
not.
To build. They are slightly better than they used to be, and there are some fancy things you can do with ships that anchor offshore. But still, it's a massive job, and apart from anything else, there are some climate implications, Catherine.
Yeah, there's a huge opportunity here as well with the kind of electrification that you're talking about to get much more, to decentralize our energy supply and to have it much more localized, and that is a lot more resilient in the future when it comes to things like storms and the stuff that can disrupt your energy supply. To have it much more distributed energy network is just much more resilient, and gives also a lot more jobs and a lot more power to local communities than what they have at the moment.
They're very good at that. Yeah.
There's a whole lot of really, really great reasons to go for, that much more distributed energy network, instead of just trying to prop up the more centralised one that we have at the moment.
But can you imagine, now that we've closed down Marston Point as a refinery, presumably that would be the logical place to build an LNG terminal, which I'm perfectly happy for them to build as long as it stays up in Whangarei and doesn't, destroy Wayne Brown's ambitions of converting the Auckland waterfront. Although I think the last thing you'd put on the Auckland waterfront is 2 or 3 gigantic LNG tanks. But Catherine, there's this other issue which maybe you or perhaps Bernard can explain about the ability. Is it as I heard this morning, I thought on the radio, the ability of the solar and wind power generators to charge effectively the same as what it costs to produce gas or coal at times of high demand. Is that right? Do you know how that works?
Are you talking about marginal pricing?
Yeah.
The way that works?
I think I am.
Yeah. I mean, that has tended to mean that that the big generators haven't wanted to invest a lot upfront in those things, because as the marginal price goes up on wholesale markets, they get paid everything at that
exactly
price,
exactly.
So that so there is an incentive not to not to have too much available energy that can pull that price down, because then the price they get for everything goes down.
And we also know when we're talking about, I was, well, what do you both think of the politics this morning of Shane Jones in what was pretty...
Are you still there, Bernard? It looks like Peter's frozen.
No, but it's what there's a contradiction between what Shane Jones was talking about and what Simeon was talking about, right? And one is the Associate Energy Minister and one is the Energy Minister. What's going on there?
Yeah, this is Shane Jones getting all Winston Peters and Rob Muldoon on this story by trying to intervene in the power market. To be honest, I'm sympathetic to the idea that there should be a cap on these wholesale power prices, but actually the whole market is broken. There are a bunch of ways to improve it, particularly for independent electricity producers, and maybe this crisis that has erupted, because it's shutting down our manufacturing sector in a space of a few weeks. It is a chance for us to relook at, for example, separating the gentailers so that they're only generating or retailing, they're not subsidising quietly between the two and shutting out competitors. There's a bunch of things you can do to make this market more competitive and useful, and to stop this sort of extreme volatility. And clearly the way it has blocked innovation in the sector. If you go overseas, they're doing amazing things in their electricity markets to get people to reduce power consumption, get paid to reduce power consumption.
I mean, even California is allowing, even California, which is to some extent run by the big power companies, is, or not literally, but even they are allowing domestic homes to feed power back into the grid, which has taken years. Yeah,
and you actually can't easily do that. There aren't decent repurchase rates for solar power being sold back into the grid. A lot of the independent retailers have actually pulled out of the market because they cannot get decent, affordable supplies of electricity wholesale in the long run. So I hope that a conflict between Shane Jones and Simeon Brown leads to some sort of reform.
Jesus, imagine a cage fight between the two of them. That would be disgusting. I'd pay money. I'd go and see it, though.
I wish they'd take them, each of them, they'd take themselves out, both of them. But no, it's going to be one to watch, this story. I think it will become the dominant story in our political economy in the next week or two, simply because factories are closing day by day, simply because they're too expensive.
And energy and GDP is something like 99.
Go ahead. Sorry,
I was going to say energy and GDP is something like 99.6 or 99.7% correlated. So everything in your economy is very dependent on that energy price. So that will have a huge impact on everybody.
Yeah, and the longer it goes on with these extreme prices, the riskier it gets for regular household consumers who are currently insulated from those wholesale spot rates. But this becomes, then it's an inflation cost of living story for the government and becomes a real problem. And it's really disappointing actually to see Simeon Brown,
Simeon
Jones, yeah. Simeon Brown jumped straight to gas as the solution. A, it's going to take a long time. B, it's going to burn more emissions. C, it's actually more expensive than solar. I mean, the thing about solar, particularly rooftop solar and grid scale solar, is that it's much easier to consent. It's cheaper to produce. You can do small, you can do large. You don't have to plan for a $1 billion project. You can whack $10,000 worth on your roof.
There is problems in terms of the amount of battery storage that you need to go along with that, because we've been talking about this dry year problem in Aotearoa for a long time, and they've kind of shut down the Lake Onslow pumped hydro option, which is fine in the sense that maybe it is better to have a more distributed solution, but you are going to need to think about the battery storage or how you're going to manage that, because it's not just the dry year problem. It's not just to worrying about between a little bit of intermittency issues with those things. It's months of a
Yes.
shortfall in energy from hydro. So yeah, and New Zealand being so as isolated as it is, almost every other country in the world, if they really need to, can import electricity from a neighbour. We don't have that option.
Although we did,
apart from LNG.
wasn't there an idea that we would be producing so much hydropower that we would be, we'd have sort of internet power cables going off to Southeast Asia.
That is possible.
I think you raised that some months ago, Bernard.
Yeah, no, it is
bollocks
actually
then, and I think it's bollocks now. But
technically not possible. But we could export power through data centers effectively, and we're already doing it in a way by through aluminium ingots.
Okay, so before Robert comes in, why aren't we being more? Well, Robert as usual can intervene in anything he likes on the Hoon, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, he can do a skateboarding dog or whatever. But Catherine, Bernard, why aren't we being more sophisticated? Why was the Onslow decision just a hideous sort of political thumbs down to an imaginative idea? Why aren't we being more imaginative at the moment?
In my view, if that's all right, Catherine, I think it's really sad that our debates about climate change, energy policy, competition policy have been effectively pulled away from the evidence and the experts towards the what I call the culture war slogan territory.
Yes.
And unfortunately, Simeon Brown, Shane Jones and Winston Peters have been the biggest users of these culture war. It's really policy by meme, and it's awful. And we need to get away from it.
By mean or by men?
Meme.
Oh,
policy
by
meme.
Men. Yeah.
And it's actually, it's these sorts of social media advisors that the New Zealand lot who went to the UK and advised the Brexit team, who are giving this advice to the government on effectively turning everything into a culture war issue.
Oh, do you mean those little shits who Isaac Lovato, and the ones who are working with him?
Yes, there's a New Zealand group whose name escapes me right now. It'll come back to me.
Isaac Lovato is the Australian one, but I know there's a couple of little rotters from New Zealand who are doing it as well.
Yes. Great. Hey, Catherine, thank you very much for coming on. It's lovely to see you. And
you're up in Northland again, is that right? Looking at the background?
I'm in Wellington.
Jesus.
Now down in Wellington.
All right.
Yeah,
Talk to you soon.
All right.
Thanks, Catherine.
Cheers.
Bye, Catherine.
Robert, you handsome devil.
Bye, Robert.
I thought of you today when I saw it. I think it was on One Roof, the New Zealand Herald's property section, which said Dunedin's Malibu was sold today for sort of $4 million or something, and I thought that must be one of Robert's houses.
Malibu in Dunedin.
Malibu in Dunedin. I mean, that is a metaphor that just stretches way too far.
Well, the climate's changing very fast.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. So you're our very own great white, Robert, and I know Dunedin is famous for its great whites. We've already mentioned to the audience that we're going to be sort of doing something of a tour of the horizon or tour of the world. Now, Bernard is convinced that this AUKUS announcement that's come out today from Joe Biden is quite significant. What do you think? Or Bernard, do you want to take the lead on that one?
Yeah, I think Bernard should.
Yeah. So there has been a quiet announcement from the White House office that there's been an upgrade of the current AUKUS deal between the UK, the US, and Australia, which talks about some different and it seems expanded agreements. We don't know the details of it, and it may well turn out to be, a big nothing. But it's clear that, the ground is shifting under our feet on AUKUS, not just in terms of who might be in charge of the United States, but also, what the deal actually is. And it's still never clear to me. I mean, I get what AUKUS is, that's paying a lot of money to America and the UK to build some nuclear submarines that you'll get in 50 years' time. AUKUS 2, though, it could be anything, and it still seems like it could be anything. And when you have the ground shifting on what AUKUS is, plus the potential ground shift on who might be running it from a US point of view, it's becoming a really difficult thing to get your hands on. Robert, what do you think about how the debate on AUKUS is going at the moment?
Well, I think there's too much preoccupation with Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. I mean, when we assess whether New Zealand should be part of Pillar 2, that really depends on whether we support the rationale for the enhanced security partnership called AUKUS. So what is the rationale? The rationale is essentially to deter China. And the key underlying point here is that AUKUS has been formed to protect or enhance, preserve, I think preserve is probably the best word, the international rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. But it's quite clear the AUKUS partners believe that China is the sole and major threat to the rules-based order in the region. So I think we should get away from this fixation with the means. When you assess a strategy, you have to say, what is the purpose of this, pillar 1 and pillar 2? And by the way, pillar 2 serves pillar 1. So when we keep, one thing that's frustrated me a lot has been the lack of clear-eyed thinking about pillar 2. Everybody keeps talking about it as if it's a standalone agreement that's got nothing to do with the rest of AUKUS. Let's turn it round. Pillar 2 serves pillar 1.
Pillar 1, exactly.
And it serves the rationale of the partnership, the security partnership, which is to deter China. So the government should come clean and say, yes, we want to deter China. We see our biggest trade partner as our biggest security threat. And in that would provide, if you like, the political rationale for joining Pillar 2. But you should not make a decision on whether there's goodies in it for New Zealand, although it's taking New Zealand in a direction it doesn't want to go.
I wonder what you think of the comments from Hugh White over the weekend in an interview on TVNZ, but also he gave a couple of interviews that got big coverage in the New Zealand Herald and also in other newspapers. For those people who may not be familiar with, who are the people who make the opinions and are influential in this place, could you talk about Hugh White and why his comments were interesting?
Well, Professor Hugh White, Professor Emeritus at ANU, I think he is a distinguished scholar. He's written about the rise of China. He also has first-hand experience as a policy practitioner. He's been in the Australian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, amongst other policy practitioner positions. So in a sense, he can draw on both the world of scholarship and policy practice in making his case. He basically argues that AUKUS is not sound strategy. And this is two essential pillars, I shouldn't use that word, two essential parts to Hugh White's argument. Firstly, there is a concern that AUKUS is not going to improve the national security of Australia in relation to the security challenges it faces. Why? Because it is promising to deliver nuclear-powered submarines, and Professor White is extremely sceptical those nuclear-powered submarines are going to arrive.
Yes.
And his argument, I think, is, well, why aren't we looking at getting in submarines which may be diesel-powered, which we can use much more quickly and therefore deter China if necessary?
Might they be from France, Robert?
I don't think you quite go that far, but having,
Yeah.
But I think that's one thing. So there is a logistical skepticism on the part of Professor White. I think the second thing is, which is related to this, is a great concern.
Here's Bernard Negroni arriving at last as well.
A great concern about the cost of all this, which is now escalating beyond 400 billion, which is a huge outlay for a middle power like Australia. And, there's a slight indignation building up in Canberra, which I think Professor Hugh White is reflecting, which is this is a very good deal for the US and the UK, while Australia is largely writing the checks.
Robert, may we move to a slightly different international subject? Is that all right, since we're doing a bit of a tour of the horizon? Bernard, Is that all right with you? Ukraine. You mentioned in a note to me today, it's kind of interesting the Ukrainians have gone towards Kursk. Of course, whenever we think about Kursk, those of us who look at the Second World War think of the largest tank battle in history until the one that I witnessed in Iraq, in Kuwait rather, in 1991, the Battle of Kursk. What is going on there? They're penetrating, the Ukrainians are kind of probing beyond Belgorod into Kursk. It's a
Yes.
very interesting, and we've had the release this week finally of the F-16s, it would appear.
Yes, and it appears that the Ukrainians took this step without necessarily getting the blessing of the United States, because the United States is now saying it's publicly asking for the rationale for what is happening. Actually, the rationale has been provided by the Ukrainian government. And Budanov, the head of the intelligence, has said the reason we've taken this is because our Western partners will not allow us to use the weapons provided by them to target those bases which are launching missiles from within Russia on Ukraine. The Russians, of course, have learnt that because occupied parts of Ukraine are now within the reach of the Ukrainian missiles, they've simply started launching much of their attacks on Ukraine from within the internationally recognized borders of Russia. And so the response of Budanov was, we've decided to go on foot and attack those areas which are launching much of this missiles into Ukraine.
Yeah.
I think it looks like it's going to be a limited incursion. But what is devastating, I'm sure you saw the clips, Peter and Bernard, on X, of a plainly furious Vladimir Putin having a televised national security meeting with his staff. And this is extraordinary because scores of prisoners have been taken, Russian soldiers. What's more, many Russian citizens are stunned by this. The fact that Ukraine could actually capture, it appears, at least 10 kilometers of territory, about 200 square kilometers. And I think it will be limited, but I think the Ukrainian view has been for some time that the West do not really understand what you've got to do to unsettle Putin. And their view is, I think...
And unsettling him is a good thing.
Well, no, I think they take the view that his political legitimacy rests in part in presenting himself as a strong man who can effortlessly invade another country and immunize his country from any consequences by nuclear saber rattling. Well, they're calling his bluff, and they're bringing the raw right home to the Russians, and that could be a politically dangerous moment for Putin, because the Ukrainians made the point that after the Prigozhin's attempt on power, that wouldn't be the end of it. And I think what the Ukrainians are doing is launching a sort of psycho-military operation.
How interesting.
To try to stir the pot in the Kremlin, amongst other things. There will be other people in Mr. Putin's entourage who will be maybe incentivized to take advantage of the fact that Mr. Putin was powerless to prevent this incursion.
Yeah, interesting that he raised it publicly. Robert, before we bring in Dr. Sanjana Hotutawa from the Disinformation Project, we will touch on probably Gaza more next week.
Sure.
Bangladesh. We seldom talk about Southeast Asia. We seldom talk about, or South Asia, India. Really interesting kind of historical transition from the long-time ruler Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh, ruler both democratic and somewhat undemocratic, towards and the interim leader would appear to be the man who created micro lending, which Bernard will get right onto in a second, Muhammad Yunus. I mean, it's really interesting to me. I mean, having grown up in that era of the first, God, this is aging me, of the first of the war between Pakistan and East Pakistan, as was, this is an interesting kind of generational dynastic shift.
It is indeed, and it does follow a tumultuous 4 weeks, of course, in which the previous leader hung on, Sheikh Hasina.
Yeah.
And but 400 people have died in what was an attempt to repress the protest. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Peter, but I think the protests were largely about the reintroduction of a quota system for civil service appointments. But yes, and the students have been at the forefront, apparently, in the protest movement in Bangladesh.
And what does it mean for New Zealand, Robert? I mean, we've got quite a large, I believe, Bangladeshi diaspora here. Bangladesh. She did. I mean, her son, when she stepped down, said that the country just clearly wasn't grateful enough to her for the, and they have made extraordinary achievements, in the last 7 years economically. They did take in 1 million Rohingya refugees. What does it have any implications for New Zealand and the Bangladeshi
I think
diaspora
it's a little
here?
bit early to say, but clearly we have people-to-people links with Bangladesh. But in addition, a lot will depend, I think, in answering your question, on how quickly the new interim president can, stabilize the situation. There's a lot of fears amongst a number of international agencies which are present in Bangladesh about the Rohingyas. There's quite a large number of people who are vulnerable, and particularly in a turbulent situation. So I think, to answer your question, Mohammed Yunus, if he can, the appointment seems to be well received internationally and domestically, so he would seem to have a good chance. But
yeah, I was trying to look up today what happened to his 2 prosecutions for corruption, but it's unclear, and I suspect that we now know that it's a little bit bogus. Now, look, may I welcome, and would you please stay, Robert, for as long as you wish?
thank you.
Dr. Sanjana Hototua. I have watched your work over the last couple of years in your old place. You're an expert in disinformation. What I wanted to bring you in to talk about, and I'm really grateful for you doing it, because I think you're in Sri Lanka, I was just about to ask you about, the comparison between the students pushing out Sheikh Hasina and what happened in Sri Lanka a couple of years ago. But in your area of expertise, because we usually get Robert to expand his area of expertise to infinite proportions, the role of disinformation and misinformation in some of these big issues that we're dealing with internationally, whether it's Gaza, Israel, whether it's the UK riots, which I want to elaborate on a little bit while Robert's here, and of course Ukraine. How are we managing that, do you feel, in New Zealand at the moment in particular? Because I see this coming back, some of the disinformation and misinformation that we saw around the COVID era.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. And I am in Sri Lanka, but I continue to focus almost exclusively on Aotearoa and what's going on and wrong at pace, I feel. Listen, that's a very broad question.
Yes, I know. I'm sorry. I've thrown you both into the deep end here. I do apologize.
And I must confess that seeing what happened in Bangladesh did bring, for many of us, memories of what occurred in Sri Lanka 2 years ago, almost to the day, actually, just a month apart. With the ouster of the then Sri Lankan president Gotabaya Rajapaksa in almost exactly the same way, perhaps with less violence, as we've unfortunately seen in Bangladesh. So the scripts are very similar. What is, however, occurring, and more to the point of your question, is that if you take the United States, if you take other parts of the world, the fear, if not the realization of that fear, is that disinformation plays a negative role in expanding the flashpoints, in expanding the division, what academics call affective polarization, that gives rise to offline consequences, including rioting and violence, that can't, as an advanced projection, be determined. So it will suddenly spring about with very little warning over something that might be the price of an ice cream or a parking ticket, or the way somebody looked at you and not even said something at you.
Yeah.
So the threshold for anger to spill over into offline consequence has dropped significantly. Not everybody who is partaking in the riots or the violence is a member of the far right, has been radicalized.
You're thinking of the UK. You're thinking of the UK.
I'm thinking of the UK in particular, but I'm just talking about more generally, actually. I mean, people who are now interested in violence are not those who, traditionally speaking, academics have studied as subscribed to those kinds of violence. You have the presentation of disinformation that suggests that, for example, very real problems in these countries, in all the countries concerned, whether it's on either side of the Atlantic or in any country in South Asia, as we know, and Robert would be far more able to kind of assess. We have a democratic deficit, right? I mean, we've grown up with this generationally. So social media isn't the cause of any of this. But what we find, though, is that social media oftentimes acts as an accelerant to violent extremism, strengthening autocracy, and strengthening the kind of narratives that leaders liked to divide people, and what we can now call, if you want, the far right. You can call it other names. I mean, it's not just the far right in UK, Peter. It's also Hindutva in India, right?
Yes.
So there are
yes.
there are.
And I'm sure it's been a big factor in Bangladesh. I mean, we know that through
right. So,
that the rumor mill now is global. I guess this is where I'm going. That the rumor mill is now global, and because we see this blip into New Zealand, you see trends arise in the UK or in the United States, and they're here the next day, more or less.
No, they're not. No, that's wrong. They're not here the next day. They're here in real time.
Yes.
No. And I want to make that point very clearly, right? I mean, there is no time lag between the transnational hopping, if you will, of some of these narratives. They latch on to historical grievances in New Zealand. They are promoted by, or produced by, or adapted by, or retransmitted by folks in New Zealand. In a way that speaks to their audiences, whether it's from a bully pulpit or from a political, speech at the Beehive or elsewhere.
Yep.
So different people adapt these narratives and they project it to audiences in New Zealand in real time. That, Peter, is aside from the seamless, frictionless, easy discoverability, access and engagement with really heinous harm on certain platforms like Telegram, where there is absolutely no moderation or oversight traditionally,
so
like
I
you would find in other platforms.
Yeah, I want to come back to you on that.
But Twitter now is a greater problem now.
Yeah, exactly. I want to come back to you just on that in 1 second. But Robert, do you have a view? I mean, I presume you know Sanjana's work. Do you have a view on how this is affecting discourse, stability, that kind of thing?
Well, first of all, I'm a great admirer of Sanjana's work, as he knows, and we had the pleasure and the privilege of him contributing to a conference last year that our university hosted on populism in global politics. Yes, I think I agree with Sanjana that the social media, which, let's be quite clear, in historical terms is still quite recent. It's about 15, 20 years old. It provides, I don't think it's the cause of many of the grievances that cause these or prompt some of the conspiracy theories that we sometimes see without foundation. But it does certainly, what I've noticed, particularly since Elon Musk has taken over X or rebranded Twitter as X, some of the attempts to control online extremism in the wake of the Christchurch call, for example, that initiative taken by Jacinda Ardern and Emmanuel Macron, some of those constraints have been much loosened. And it was almost, if you are on X, as I am, you could see almost overnight a change in the tone and also the level of abuse, actually. But what I would say is that, yeah, I think that the social media does play a role, and I think governments have to look long and hard at how they can regulate the social media in a way that strikes a balance between enabling us to access it and also curbing some of the incitement to violence. What I found particularly interesting, excuse me, the reference to the riots in the UK, a number of people have been identified, prominent people who are now trying desperately to distance themselves. I've been watching Nigel Farage in the last 24 hours, desperately trying to distance himself from the violence. He said in 30 years in public life, he has never advocated violence.
He's just asking
but
questions.
A lot of people have actually said that, you know, people like Farage amongst others, have played a key role in creating the discourse that then has gathered momentum on the social media.
Thanks, Robert. Bernard's got a question too.
Yes, interesting, Robert. You mentioned the attempts to try to soften the damage, reduce the virality. I'm curious, Sanjana. Thank you very much for coming on our show. It's wonderful. If the examples of governments trying to shut down entire networks has had any impact or works at all, because I noticed for a day or two, Bangladesh shut down some of the networks. India has done it on occasion, and Turkey as well. Whether actually just turning them off actually works.
Yeah, so has Sri Lanka actually, around 3 or 4 times. It works and it does not. It works in the immediate context to stymie the flow of information that may give rise to violence. But it's also a problem because you can't bear witness to violence. And so human rights, ground truth reporting, human rights recording, and citizens bearing witness to state-led violence or state proxy-led violence. As we know, in Bangladesh, most recently, you had thugs and proxies of Hasina going and openly shooting students. Hundreds of them were killed. That witnessing was completely stymied on account of those blocks. So the government's excuse to block is in fact a way to stop citizens from reporting around what is occurring. So it's always a problematic thing to block, as governments have done in this manner, carte blanche. In Bangladesh's case, turned off the internet basically, and Egypt's done it, Turkey's done it, India's done it. India has actually the longest running block in Kashmir. So these things are very, very complicated. What I would say, though, is that there is some need for a robust discussion on regulation that goes beyond self-regulation by these companies. I think that much is well accepted, that Silicon Valley cannot be trusted to regulate themselves the harms that are promoted and propagated at a pace where local jurisdiction, like local laws and local regulations and local frameworks and local policing and local policies just can't keep up. And we see that now with Mr. Musk and what has occurred.
Right, which is exactly what I wanted to bring you in for today in a way, Sanjana, other than, Robert is always so adaptable in this. But let me just ask you a question about this, because I am torn to some extent, because I have worked at some of the platforms. I've worked for some of the platforms, and with them, I am not sure that they can be contained by any national regulation. They work we are living now in a First Amendment world where the First Amendment is global, where Section 230 is global. How do we deal with this? Where you've also got this weird, you've got the world's richest man, one of the world's cleverest men, but one of the world's most naive men as well, influencing things.
Yeah, I don't think, it's debatable, right? I don't think he's particularly intelligent. I don't think he's particularly clever. What he does have is a very large following on a platform that he now owns. And it quite literally has shaped the algorithms around his amplification. And so, if you take a look at some of the research coming out by Marco and Jones and others around the manner in which Twitter has played a role in amplifying hate and harms, it is to the degree that Musk, when he promotes something, when he replies to something, when he's just asking a question, when he puts an emoji, when he quotes something, or when he puts out a meme, since he bought over the platform, and particularly during the context of the UK violence, it has amplified violent extremism. And there's no check on that. And it's not new in the sense that since he bought the platform, as Robert said, you could see a decline. It's not just a personal observation. It's an academic, research-based, analytical, grounded observation that the platform's integrity has declined significantly, also because he's just fired the people who do trust and safety.
But it's just
But in the
freedom of
context,
speech. It's freedom of speech, Sanjana. He's created a true freedom of
no,
speech funnel.
no, I disagree with that because he is also taking down accounts. He's also telling, I don't know whether I can swear on this, but I think it's an accurate quote. He literally told advertisers to fuck off, who don't like him. And now he's taking GARM, which is an organization that actually deals with ethical advertising, to court for something that he told advertisers to go to hell round. So, I mean, there's no consistency, there's no coherence. It is ad hoc, it is stochastic, it is all to do with his ego. And so he also deplatforms, and Twitter continues to deplatform accounts that he doesn't like, or, for whatever reason, runs counter to what he wants. So it's not free speech in the essential sense of the term that even he would propose. He's not doing that. Sorry, Peter, just one point. We tend to focus on a man when I think particularly in relation to what the Christchurch call in 2021 and in 2022 also under the former Prime Minister Ardern wanted to focus on, which is the role of algorithms. This is something that Amnesty International put out in relation to the current riots. It's something that lots of researchers have talked about. These are black box algorithms. They're rapacious. They work on off our data. We are the source for their power. Nobody can question them. Nobody knows how they work. And it is the algorithms that amplify the content that nobody has an insight around, that allow for the kinds of stuff that now get the most kind of engagement. And that's not just a Twitter problem, that's a Silicon Valley problem.
Sanjana, we normally segue within the show. I'm going to segue back to Bernard because we need to move on to Kate Day. But I would love to have you back on again, if you don't mind, soon. This is New Zealand's most sophisticated news and information podcast, as you can see from our fabulous guests. Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Sanjana.
Thank you.
Bernard, over to you. I'm so sorry.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Sanjana. To be honest, I think you're one of the heroes of the last couple of years in terms of documenting and exposing and thinking about these issues that are so important. Thank you. Now we've got a fresh and welcome new guest to the show, Kate Day, who is the co-director of Common Grace Aotearoa. Welcome into the Hoon, Kate.
Kia ora, good to be here.
Yeah, I've been following your work over the last few months and have been incredibly impressed with the impact that yourself and a group of campaigners have had around the issue of disconnection fees for those people who haven't been able to pay the bills, and you've done some great research, and it looks like there's some momentum and action happening. But first, could you talk about the campaign and what you found about disconnection fees?
Yeah, sure. So about a year ago, pretty much a year to the day actually, a group of organisations got together under an umbrella called Everyone Connected. And the basic premise that we agreed on was that it shouldn't be a privilege to have power. And so we realised that there was a lot broken with our electricity system. You only have to look in the news this week to see some of the failures there. But we chose to focus on some really low-hanging fruit where tangible change could be made quickly that would have a real impact for people, particularly on those lowest incomes where they're facing or threatened with disconnection. And so one of the asks that we chose, and this is aimed at the Electricity Authority, which sets the rules for electricity retailers, was to end disconnection and reconnection fees in cases of unpaid bills. And so this is a situation when someone is unable to pay, eventually gets disconnected, and then gets hit with another fee. We felt that was inherently unfair and potentially, a penalty for being poor. And so we wanted to look into that further. And so that was one of the asks of our campaign. Others were around prepay prices, fairer prepay prices, and then mandatory consumer protections. But the disconnection fees is what the research that came out a couple of weeks ago was focused on.
And you were calling for those companies to remove the fees. There are only a couple of the retailers who don't charge them, No Mai Rā and Toast Electric. But some big news this week. Could you tell us what happened with at least one of the gentailers?
Yeah, we were delighted to hear from Contact Energy about their decision to remove disconnection and reconnection fees for non-payment, which is just fantastic. So they're 20% of the residential market and the second largest company for residential consumers. So that represents, thousands of households that won't have the stress of potentially paying that additional fee at an already really difficult time. So we really, really welcome that decision. And we, as you mentioned, they joined 2 other companies, but we hope that others can follow suit.
And have you had any conversations, or do you have any expectations that the 3 others, and they're the main ones where there have been issues, particularly Genesis in particular, and to a lesser extent Meridian, I understand, that they might actually, step into line and join up with Contact?
I hold out hope that they do make that decision. Certainly we've been in contact with them through the course of the research to ask how they justified the fees, sort of what the breakdown of their costs associated with disconnection and reconnection is, because under the consumer care guidelines, which is the voluntary standard for the industry, fees are supposed to reflect actual costs and to be reasonable. And so we explored whether, as ordinary consumers, we could find out how the fees related to costs and whether they were reasonable. And we found a widespread lack of transparency, and actually only heard from 3 companies about, proper information sort of about how it related to their costs. So we remain unconvinced that the fees are reasonable, but we do feel that it is always inherently unreasonable to charge a fee of someone already heavily indebted who has proven that they cannot pay their bills. So we're in ongoing conversations with those other companies, and we hope that they will do the right thing. In the meantime, we're still advocating to the Electricity Authority as well, who, after they've mandated the guidelines, which they're doing effective 1st of January next year, we hope that disconnection fees will be among the consumer protections that they look to implement next.
Because when you look at these fees, $200 often to disconnect, and then often $400 to reconnect, for a lot of people who actually have modern power meters, this is not a trip to the house to do an actual, pull the wires out. This is a click of a mouse.
Yeah.
And also my understanding is that there are some intermediaries in this business who run the power meters who charge much, much lower than the $200 or the $400, which on the face of it seems like a straight out unfair situation to essentially make a profit on the cost of disconnection and reconnection.
Yeah, so the numbers that we found for what they're called remote disconnections when it is done digitally ranged from $0 to $235 for the total of disconnection and reconnection. So that, as you said, is for a service almost entirely digital. And so we couldn't find out why the fees are that high. As far as we can tell, the metering equipment provider, which is the interim company, which actually has the roll over the meters, does charge a fee, but certainly it's not, anywhere near something that would end up around $200 mark. When it comes to the manual disconnection and reconnection, when they do have to send someone out, that's understandable that it might be more expensive. But our concern there is that people who end up with not having a smart meter are often renting. And so for them to be hit with that fee when they don't control whether they have a smart meter or not seems another unfairness. And so, if companies can't outright remove the fees, we'd ask them to remove the manual the manual fees, and that's an incentive on the companies to roll out smart meters more quickly as well.
It's Peter here. Congratulations on having a victory with Contact. Can you elaborate a little bit? Because I was quite struck talking to Bernard at the beginning of this when we were doing a little intro, that there is in fact prepaid going on in New Zealand, because I've been living in the UK for the last 300 million years, and it always flabbergasted me either the people having to put 2 and 6 into their slots before they could get power, or as I used to see much more often, going now to the shop, to the local dairy to get their little card charged up. It's a weird syndrome, isn't it, where the poor pay more for everything? Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So certainly that is a concern that we have. So there are around about 30,000 households in New Zealand who use prepay electricity. And so this is a pay before scheme where if you don't pay, your electricity cuts off. And so unfortunately, many users of prepay are doing so because they have a bad credit history and can no longer get pay monthly plans. And for that reason, this is a particularly vulnerable cohort. However, within that, there are certainly people who choose prepay and prefer it because it helps them to budget or it suits their lifestyle. So it is a choice in some cases, but our concern is for those for whom it is not, how are they protected and how are the prices sitting? There was research in June last year by Consumer New Zealand that compared the prices for prepay and found that they were 15% higher in one city, 17% higher in another city than the best offerings, best pay monthly offerings on the market. And so that is people due to their credit history excluded from better deals. And again, we feel that's paying a premium for being poor because per kilowatt hour they're paying a higher price. We haven't repeated that risk.
And David Moring, who's one of our regulars, asks, does this apply to internet and other utilities as well?
I can't answer that question. We've only looked at electricity.
Jesus Christ, Kate, get on with it. You need to expand the operations of your operations of your organisation.
They're all bundled together as well these days, which makes me
okay. Let me ask you another. So, because I am flabbergasted that this actually happens in New Zealand, which I know I shouldn't be. Are there large numbers of New Zealanders who are unbanked? Is that a common?
I can't answer that question.
Bernard, you'll know that.
It's less of an
Thanks,
issue.
Kate. I'm sorry we usually have Robert Patman, who we bend into all sorts of pretzels to cover all sorts of issues. So forgive me, Bernard.
There is less of an issue with unbanking here than in the UK, but it's becoming more and more of a problem, particularly with tougher rules on anti-money laundering and countering foreign terrorism. Kate, just one final question from me, if that's all right, about the broader structure and performance of the electricity industry in providing affordable, reliable electricity for actual consumers and households, which was the original idea with electricity. Obviously, there's a lot of industries who use it and lots of different suppliers and consumers. But we have a market now where the big four players, the gentailers, dominate, and we've got fresh research actually in the last day or so showing that these extraordinary wholesale prices, 8 to 10 times higher than normal because of gas shortages and a failure, I think, of the industry to invest their cash flows, which are large in the last decade in new renewable generation. Means that they are making enormous profits. To give you an idea, the four gentailers together are producing annually close to $2 billion each year. In fact, in the next year, we've just seen an upgrade in their profit forecast.
What a surprise.
Yes, that they're looking at 2.7 billion in profits in the next year, most of which are still being handed back as dividends. What do you think of how competitive and how good the industry is at providing the affordable power many people need?
It's not fit for purpose and it's not serving New Zealanders. If we think about electricity as an essential service and then we realise that we don't actually know how many households were disconnected, but the best estimate is 40,000 last year because they couldn't pay their bills. It's not serving those New Zealanders. And we're looking as well at price rises into next year with the lines charges increasing. So from 1st of April, there'll be average of $10 or $20 in different regions, average increase per household. We've got a really big problem about how we're going to continue to prevent disconnections and make sure that people can access electricity at our standard electricity usage rates, let alone the climate change transition that's going to need more electrification. So it's not serving us and definitely needs a serious rethink. And that rethink has got to include provision for those who are always going to struggle to pay. What are our backstops, given that this is an essential service? We don't disconnect people who don't pay rates from their water. Electricity is an essential thing for health, and we need an alternative to disconnecting people who can't pay.
Kate, thank you so much for coming on. And I mean, Bernard's your mate, but thank you so much for that and for the work you've done with Contact. Or the
Thank you,
achievement.
Kate.
Thank you.
Wonderful to have you on, and thank you for your time. Lovely.
Thanks so much.
Cheers. And just to
Bernard,
wrap it up,
what?
Peter.
Well,
do you have a skateboarding dog?
I sort of have a skateboarding dog, but what do we think about that show? I mean, I think Sanjana is amazing, and I thought, and I don't think I've ever spoken to him before, but he also endured an incredible amount of opprobrium. I usually normally use a slightly shorter word, but my ex-mother-in-law my ex-stepmother-in-law criticized me for swearing on the show in the past, so I'll try not to. But there's some good people there. I mean, I think he's done an amazing job in exposing some of these problems, and I'm a little bit worried that we have some fairly inconsiderate politicians at the moment who are not really thinking about the impact of their words.
No, and my understanding is that a lot of the research that he and Kate Hanna and others have done is under pressure from funding cuts from the government. They are not popular with many of the supporters of the government, and I think that these guys are heroes. People like Sanjana, Susie Wiles,
Kate.
Michael
Baker.
I'm
sorry. Yeah.
Michael Baker. I know.
Even if we disagree with them from time to time, or even if they get out ahead of their own headlights, they're doing their best, it seems to me.
And they are, they're not doing it for large amounts of money or any sort of, this is, I'm stepping into the line of fire because this is important work and we all benefit because of it. And the issues they raise.
Speaking of Susie Wiles, by the way, Bernard, sorry to interrupt you, but have you noticed that one of Trump's advisors is called Susie Wiles? And every time I hear it on the wireless, I just think, oh my God, it's not our Susie, is she? Not that she's my Susie, of course, for those of us, including you, Sean Plunkett, who are listening. Bernard, let me give you the skateboarding dog. It's just a little thing from Steve Brownias, who is probably, I would argue, the best non-fiction journalism writer in New Zealand in terms of the quality of his writing and the cleverness. And I know people have issues with him, but as a tiny fragment of his extraordinarily good coverage this week, in the last couple of weeks actually, in the Herald, of the story of the murder trial of the eye doctor, he noted in his piece today, the KC, Mr. Mansfield. Mansfield has something like a PhD in sarcasm. Yeah,
I think you have to study to get that.
I know. I think I've barely got a school C in sarcasm, but I admired that line. Thank you.
Yeah. No. I aspire to a UE in sarcasm for all those old
You're
people.
You're too nice, though. I'm meaner than you. All right. Talk to you soon.
Thank
you,
very
everybody.
much, Peter. Thank you to everyone. Ngā mihi nui. And
Oh, Bernard, I had a friend say just now, by the way, would Bernard please tell us more than a minute before the Hoon that the Hoon is coming?
It's always on at 5:00.
I know, but you could get your bloody thing out
yes,
there.
True.
Anyway, see you.
Yes, no, we'll work on that. This will die in the edit. Thank you.
As we get more professional. See you later.
Thank you, mate. Mā te wā.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.